They were a young and rising power couple. She fought her way from Harlem to the hallowed halls of Harvard.
She was on her way up.
And he was a budding songwriter, penning hits for stars at the top of the charts.
He wrote for acts such as New Edition, as well as Ryan Leslie.
Together, they seemed like a match made in heaven.
She was absolutely in love.
Until jealousy and greed turned their picture-perfect world upside down.
It was a big love triangle.
You could see the blood on the ground from where he collapsed.
My head was just spinning.
The investigation would send police on a desperate manhunt and lead them to the unlikeliest of suspects.
Love makes people do crazy things.
This story involved drugs, murder, a robbery. Things like this just don't happen in an Ivy League institution.
May 18th, 2009. It's a beautiful spring day in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At prestigious Harvard University, students are preparing for final exams. But just before 5 p.m., the stillness is shattered in an explosion of violence when gunshots ring out from the Kirkland House dormitory.
No one could have seen this coming.
It was really shocking.
Seconds later, a young African-American man stumbles from the dorm and into the path of stunned onlookers. Suffering from what appears to be a gunshot wound to the abdomen, the man slumps to the ground, a pool of blood collecting underneath him. Moments later, the first 911 calls begin pouring in. Police and paramedics race to the scene and rush the man to the nearest hospital. Word of the shooting spreads like wildfire across campus, leaving everyone wondering, how could something like this have happened at such a revered institution?
My boss told me somebody got shot at Harvard, and I looked at him like, with what, a super soaker? Because people usually don't get shot at Harvard University.
But as police comb the campus for clues, they uncover a seedy undercurrent of sex, lies, and drugs, along with a conspiracy that will threaten to take down one of Harvard's brightest stars.
This young woman was just caught in a bad situation.
Born in Harlem, New York in 1987, Brittany Smith didn't come from a life of wealth and privilege.
She had an upbringing with a single-parent household. She lived with her father. Her mother was on narcotics, and so her father predominantly raised her.
But Brittany didn't let her tough upbringing keep her down. She dreamed of one day attending an Ivy League school and worked hard to achieve it.
Brittany Smith was a very bright child. She went to a high school that had a very rigorous curriculum. Graduated from there, top of her class.
Very scholarly, loved doing volunteer work. She organized canned food drives and was an officer for her student council.
All that hard work paid off in 2005 when Brittany was accepted into one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, Harvard University.
She started in Harlem and then ended up at Harvard. Brittany was clearly somebody who was very dedicated to her education and very dedicated to her future.
But due in large part to her modest background, life at Harvard wasn't always an easy fit for Brittany.
Brittany was in a completely different world from the world that she grew up in. At Harvard, most of the students come from an upper middle class to upper class financial background. She felt quite isolated.
Even so, the gifted student did make a handful of friends at Harvard. Among those was another New York native named Shaniqua Campbell.
Hey, how are you? Great, how are you? Good, how's your day? Good.
Brittany worked with Shaniqua at the Harvard Student Assistance Office, and the two became fast friends.
Shaniqua Campbell was from the Bed-Stuy neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, and she attended a high school with an academic program that was just as rigorous as Brittany's in preparing students for the Ivy League.
But even with a friend like Shaniqua by her side, something still felt missing in Brittany's life, a man to share it with.
She's brilliant. She's got her whole life ahead of her, and she just has this one piece of her that's just not being fulfilled.
But one weekend, Brittany met someone who would change her life forever. Up-and-coming songwriter, Jabri Coffney.
I'm Jabri.
Hey, I'm Brittany.
It's nice to meet you, Brittany. I mean, forgive me for staring, but you're the most beautiful girl I've seen all night.
Jabri was very, very handsome, very attractive.
Hailing from Harlem, Jabri wasn't just dashing, he was also ambitious.
He grew up in a similar circumstance in a neighborhood that didn't have as much promise as he had hoped. But he was able to rise above that. He ended up becoming a songwriter. He wrote for acts such as New Edition, as well as Ryan Leslie.
For Brittany, one look at Jabri and she was hooked.
Brittany Smith falls for Jabri.
The son of a retired New York City police officer, Jabri was exactly the man Brittany felt she needed. He had a warm smile, a smooth style, and was a hometown celebrity.
He was charismatic. He made her feel good. And at the end of the day, what girl doesn't want to feel good?
Jabri visited Brittany nearly every week at Harvard. By her senior year, they were inseparable.
Hey.
What's up, baby?
She decided that she wanted to let him move into her dorm room and, you know, him be her everything.
Since Jabri wasn't a Harvard student, Brittany had to keep their living arrangement in the Lowell House dorm a secret. But all the sneaking around was well worth the effort.
And a place where it's very easy to feel invisible, she became very important to him.
Living with the love of her life and just 2 weeks away from a Harvard degree, Brittany Smith's life seemed perfect.
She had a great boyfriend. She had a great education. She was finishing her education, and she had so much promise. The world was her oyster.
But then, May 18th, 2009, a terrifying shooting sends shockwaves through Harvard's campus. That afternoon, Brittany's due to meet a friend to shop for graduation dresses.
Hey, Brittany, it's me. I'm standing outside of your dorm. Where are you? Give me a call back.
After several hours, Brittany's still a no-show. It's an unusual move, especially for someone like her.
Brittany's nowhere to be found. It wasn't like Brittany not to answer her phone.
Given the mysterious shooting that just took place on Harvard's campus, friends fear the worst. But who is the victim in this horrifying shooting? And is it possible these two seemingly unrelated events are bound together in blood?
Don't pull a gun out if you're not about to use it. Go, 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 go.
In May 2009, Harvard senior Brittany Smith and boyfriend Jabri Copney had all the makings of a beautiful life together.
She had a great relationship with someone that she really loved and trusted. She was 2 weeks away from graduating from the most prestigious university in the world. Everything was in front of her.
But on May 18th, Brittany went missing, leaving friends worried about her well-being. At the same time, police swarm Harvard's campus following a shooting inside the Kirkland House dormitory.
Can you tell me what happened? What did you see?
We just came from class. We noticed a guy come out of the Kirkland dorm right there, holding his stomach, bleeding.
Speaking to witnesses on the scene, they learned students had seen men fleeing the area moments after the shooting.
Was there anybody with him? Was anybody following him, chasing him?
There were 3 black males.
3 black males, okay.
One of the witnesses said when they saw 3 people run away from the scene of the crime, one was wearing an orange jacket.
The guy who got shot, have you ever seen him anywhere else around campus?
I've seen him before, just like in passing with class and stuff. I think his name's Justin.
Justin.
Detectives ultimately identified the victim as 21-year-old Justin Cosby. They reach out to Justin's family and inform them of his injuries.
I was completely devastated. I was in a state of shock.
Barely hanging on, Justin has been rushed into surgery.
I asked the doctor, was he gonna die? And the doctor told me he could not promise that he wouldn't. I couldn't believe I was hearing him say that.
Even after surgery, Justin's wounds may be too severe to overcome.
Justin had been shot in the stomach, but the bullet had traveled towards his heart. Each time the blood pressure rised, then it dropped again. And I kept looking at the monitor until the monitor flatlined. And at the point of flatline, I just lost it.
Sorry, man, we're gonna need you to step out.
What's going on? Look,
I'm sorry, we're gonna need you to leave.
After frantic attempts to save his life, at 4 a.m., doctors pronounced Justin Cosby dead.
I just could not believe my son had actually died. This is my baby.
But who was Justin Cosby, and what could have sparked his terrible death? That evening, detectives sit down with Justin's mother to try and pinpoint a motive.
How long was Justin going to Harvard?
He's not a student at Harvard.
He's not a student at Harvard?
Justin was a student at Salem State University.
Justin was studying business administration, and he was also looking to study computer science.
He was so full of ambition, hope, life.
But what exactly was Justin doing on Harvard's campus that day? Questioning students, it doesn't take long for police to find one possible answer.
Justin supplemented his income by selling small amounts of marijuana to Harvard students.
Was it possible drugs had played some role in Justin's death? It seems plausible, but no one can imagine any of his regular customers were behind his violent death.
Everyone liked Justin, and he seemed to be pretty cool with just about everybody.
Detectives decide to pull Justin's phone records. Combing through his call log, they make a stunning discovery.
The last contact that he had was with Brittany Smith.
But Justin's friends and family have never heard of Brittany Smith.
They tried to contact her several times, and she didn't return any of their phone calls.
Is it possible Brittany's recent disappearance and Justin's murder are somehow connected?
Brittany Smith was the last person that he spoke with, according to the phone records. This makes one wonder, where is she? Is she a victim? Is she a suspect? At this point, it becomes a question of her safety.
Fearing the worst, detectives race across campus to Brittany's dorm room to conduct a welfare check.
The police went possibly looking for a body because she was missing.
Britt?
The knocks to Brittany's door go unanswered.
Brittany?
With help from the dorm's RA, police gain entry.
Once they opened the dorm room, there was absolutely nothing out of place. Everything was perfect.
It's all right to me. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong.
They said, this can't be a place of interest for us.
They kept going back to her room to look for her, and she wasn't there.
With one person dead, Brittany officially missing, and 3 potential suspects on the run, this investigation is growing more sinister and mysterious by the minute. But as detectives race to connect the dots, they'll soon uncover a startling new piece of evidence, along with a twisted trail leading back to the gates of Harvard's most famous rival, Yale University. It's now been hours since neighboring student Justin Cosby was gunned down at Harvard University. It's a crime that's rocked the campus and surrounding community and sent police on a desperate search for 22-year-old Brittany Smith.
Her phone number was the last phone number in Justin's phone. So that's a part of the mystery. Why is it that she's not answering her phone? Why is it that she haven't come back to the dorm?
Unsure if Brittany is also a victim or could somehow be involved in the murder of Justin Cosby, investigators decide to pay a visit to their counterparts at the Harvard University Police Department. Speaking to officers, they learn every student that enters a dormitory has to scan their school ID.
The police checked the Kirkland House security records. They discovered that Brittany's card had been swiped several times around the time of the murder.
But as police already know, Brittany lived in Lowell House, on the other side of campus from the dorm where Justin Cosby was shot. Still, there's no denying that someone did use her card to gain entry to the building that day.
Her card had been used so many times, so that's a little bit suspicious.
Given the circumstances, police decide to execute a search warrant on the Lowell House dormitory where Brittany lives. This seemingly routine search turns up something very unusual.
Well, 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 looky here.
Can I get a picture?
In one of the closets, they find an orange and black varsity Letterman's jacket that looks just like the jacket that was described by witnesses earlier who saw 3 men leaving the scene of the crime.
It's a startling discovery.
Got a bag we can take this in?
But detectives still don't know who the jacket belongs to or if it's an exact match.
Take a closer look at that.
After sending the jacket to the lab for processing, police expand their search to adjoining dorm rooms on the hunch that possibly another student used Brittany's card to gain entrance to the Kirkland dorm. It isn't long before they make another stunning discovery inside the nearby room of student Catherine Wilson.
Hey, look over here.
What you got?
It's loaded.
Loaded? I can see CSI in here.
It's a loaded 9mm handgun, the same caliber as the bullets recovered from Justin Cosby's body. But when detectives ask Catherine about the gun, they get more questions than answers.
Catherine, why did we find a gun underneath your bed?
I have no idea what you're talking about. You found a gun under my bed?
It's not your gun.
I don't own a gun.
Catherine says she typically leaves her door unlocked and that someone must have stashed it there while she was out.
Why's your door unlocked?
This is Harvard campus. It's a safe place.
To detectives, it seems like Catherine's telling the truth, so they press her about the other women on her floor, one in particular.
You think Brittany might be involved?
Brittany? No way. She would never be involved in something like this.
But if Brittany's blockmate can't fathom Brittany killing Justin, then who had? One possible clue lay at the bottom of the bag that contained the pistol.
The police did find 2 IDs.
Those IDs belong to students from Yale.
I don't know those guys.
You don't know those guys?
No.
But what do 2 Yale students have to do with a murder on Harvard's campus? There's only one way to find out. Police bring Josh Bowman and Adam Cobb in for questioning. Detectives start with Josh.
How would you explain the fact is that we found your ID in a bag with a gun at Harvard?
When police confronted about why they found his ID at Harvard, he revealed a new story.
True, I mean, all of it, everything. From what I know, she runs Harvard.
Josh claims that in 2008, he drove to Cambridge to attend the annual Harvard-Yale football game. Once there, Shaniqua summoned him to her dorm room for an impromptu meeting. When he arrived at her dorm, he wasn't greeted by Shaniqua, but by Brittany Smith's longtime boyfriend, Jabri Copney.
What's up?
What's up? Hey.
Hey, glad you came. Come on in.
How you doing?
Good.
See ya.
Jabri used to smoke pot with Shaniqua every day in her room.
So I was hoping to get my stuff.
I got it. But
Awesome.
before that, Jabri here, he wants to run some things by you.
Jabri propositioned to buy 3 pounds of marijuana from him.
All right. Let's do it.
The next weekend, he and his friend Adam drove down to New York to seal the deal.
He traveled to Grand Central Station to meet with Jabri.
But when they arrived, Jabri claimed he'd left some of the money at his Harlem apartment.
The 3 then traveled back to Jabri's apartment to get the rest of the money. And Blaine Jiggets, or as he was introduced to the 2 of them, Bat Boy, was waiting for them. And they robbed the 2 Yale students of their 3 pounds of marijuana and take their IDs as well.
Josh's story is a revelation. But is it possible Josh's statement is simply a ploy to steer investigators away from himself? When detectives question Josh's friend Adam, he tells the same story. With no evidence to hold them, police decide to release Josh and Adam later that day. Faced with another dead end, police are still struggling to answer 2 key questions. Where is Brittany Smith? And who killed Justin Cosby? With a list of suspects growing longer by the day and ranging from street-level drug dealers to Ivy League preppies, police can't rule out any possibility.
The first thing that would come into play is this is a turf war. And if this is a turf war, we're gonna end up in a very bad situation.
Harvard senior Brittany Smith thought she'd met the man of her dreams when Jabri Copney walked into her life. But their 2 lives took an unexpected turn when Brittany went missing following the shooting death of 21-year-old Justin Cosby.
Brittany is the last person to be contacted. And after the police tried to reach Brittany, she went AWOL. She could not be found.
Adding to the mystery is the fact police have recovered a suspicious jacket from Brittany's dorm room, a room she secretly shares with boyfriend Jabrai, and a loaded handgun was found in a nearby room. When coupled with the statement of a student drug dealer from Yale, detectives are beginning to wonder if there's more to the relationship between Brittany's boyfriend Jabrai and her best friend Shaniqua Campbell. Namely that Jabrai and Shaniqua might be partners in the campus drug trade and are behind the Cosby murder as well as Brittany's disappearance.
Shaniqua sold ecstasy and cocaine and all sorts of drugs and was well known as a drug dealer on campus.
Shaniqua is pretty sneaky. She is the cornerstone of this whole problem.
Police decide it's time to bring Shaniqua down to the station and press her for some answers.
Let's start by telling us where you were May 19th. Do you remember?
I was taking a filing exam.
Shaniqua Campbell was really irritated that the police were asking her questions in regards to Justin's murder.
According to Shaniqua, the only thing she knows about Justin is his reputation on campus.
He sold weed. Everybody knew that.
Well, word is, you may sling a little weed. Is that true?
Sometimes.
So did y'all like have the same supplier, have the same clients?
We don't discuss that.
At first, Shaniqua seems to be telling the truth, but it's what Shaniqua says about her connection to Jabrai Copney that rings false.
When police asked Shaniqua Campbell if she knew Jabrai, she said yes, but only through her friend Brittany Smith.
Shaniqua says she barely knew Jabrai, let alone ever smoked any dope with him. As for Brittany, Shaniqua claims she hasn't seen her friend in days. To police, it all sounds pretty fishy. But with no evidence linking Shaniqua to Justin's murder or Brittany's disappearance, detectives are forced to let her go. But not long after their conversation, one burning question is finally answered.
24 hours after the shooting, Brittany Smith shows up in her dorm room.
Brittany,
Yes?
can we talk to you for a few minutes?
Yeah, come in.
Brittany, where have you been? We've been looking for you.
She tells police that she was homesick and she decided to go home to see her friends and family.
She said, "Oh, guys, I didn't even know you were looking for me. What happened?"
While detectives are relieved that Brittany is alive and well, they're curious why Brittany's key card had been used at the Kirkland dorm around the time of the murder.
We got your key card account, so we know you were over there.
Yeah, I just went to go visit a friend.
She said the swipe card had been used at Kirkland House because she had gone there to visit a friend.
From there, Brittany says she returned to her room, packed a bag, and headed to Boston's South Station Terminal to catch a bus back home to Harlem. But when police ask Brittany about the whereabouts of her boyfriend, Jabrai Copney, Brittany denies knowing anyone by that name.
Tell me about Jabrai.
Who's Jabrai?
Your boyfriend, Jabrai?
I don't know anyone by that name.
What are you talking about? Jabrai who? I have absolutely no idea who this person is, which would throw up a red flag.
Police had asked Brittany who her boyfriend was, and she had told them it was a boy named Jordan Coombs who lived in South Carolina.
So you don't know Jabrai at all?
No.
Police can tell Brittany is hiding something. Is it the fact that her boyfriend and best friend were potentially involved in a murder?
Brittany really loved Jabrai and lied to police.
But until Brittany opens up to police, there's little they can do to move the investigation forward. So detectives turn to Brittany's friends, hoping to learn a little bit more about her and Jabrai's relationship. It seems Jabrai had been enjoying all the perks of an Ivy League education, courtesy of Brittany and her electronic ID card.
It was basically like a vacation. You know, he had meals there, he had a place to stay, he was using all the gym, the cafeteria, he had a dorm to stay in. He got to go to Harvard without having to pay any tuition.
But according to Brittany's friends, like so many other legitimate Harvard undergrads, Jabrai started his own small business while on campus. Though Jabrai's startup wasn't exactly legal.
Copney had in fact set up a little gang from which he planned robberies, he sold drugs, all right on the Harvard campus, in the dormitory.
Brittany's friends tell investigators the drug dealing wasn't the only reason they didn't think too highly of Jabri.
Brittany and Jabri led a tumultuous relationship.
There's no record of anybody talking positively about their relationship. In fact, people saw them fighting.
Jabri was a very jealous individual.
And apparently, when it came to Brittany's past, friends claimed Jabri could get downright nasty.
Copney told her to get rid of the stuffed animals and the framed pictures of a previous relationship that she was in. Brittany then decided to hide these underneath her blockmate Catherine's bed.
It's the same bed where police had just recovered a loaded gun and 2 IDs, which begs the question, did Brittany know about the handgun? And whose was it? Jabri's, Shaniqua's, or hers? Hoping to use this new information to get a better handle on Brittany's alibi, investigators head to Boston's South Bus Station. Pulling surveillance footage from the day of the shooting, officers spot Brittany boarding a bus bound for New York that evening. But Brittany wasn't traveling alone.
When they pull the tapes, they're shocked to find that Brittany did not go home alone. They find that she had purchased 3 other tickets as well as her own.
Could Brittany's entourage be the same 3 men witnesses had seen fleeing the scene of Justin Cosby's fatal shooting? If so, where are they now? As police intensify their manhunt, a shocking confession will finally reveal a twisted secret and a motive for murder. From the outside looking in, Brittany Smith and Jabri Copney's love affair looked like a fairy tale. But following the murder of 21-year-old Justin Cosby, police have discovered that Jabri was dealing drugs on the Harvard campus, and the couple's relationship was far from ideal.
Jabri was very bossy to Brittany. He had a temper, and he ordered her around.
But just how far will Brittany go to protect the man she loves? A surveillance video taken on the day of the Cosby shooting shows Brittany boarding a bus with 3 other men.
Brittany bought 4 bus tickets, and they all boarded the bus together, and they went off to New York City.
Police quickly ID one of the men in the video, Jabri Copney.
At that point, the police realized that Brittany had been lying to them about everything.
Brittany has turned an already bad situation into a worse situation. Because she lied to the police, now she becomes a suspect and not necessarily just a person of interest.
With Brittany refusing to tell the truth, police know it'll be hard to pin this crime on Jabri and his 2 associates. Fortunately, they received the lab results on the orange and black Letterman jacket found in Brittany's room.
The forensic evidence showed that there was gunpowder on that jacket.
When they test the residue, they find that it also matches the residue found on the body of Justin.
They found gunpowder in it from the same weapon that was under Catherine's bed. How coincidental.
The jacket, the loaded 9mm, the surveillance footage fleeing to New York City. The only things still missing are Jabri and his crew. But then, on May 21st, much to the surprise of investigators, Jabri Copney walks into the Cambridge Police Department and surrenders.
Jabri actually turns himself in once he realizes that the police have a plethora of evidence against him.
Interviewing Jabri, detectives soon learn the identities of the 2 other men in the surveillance video.
It was me, my man Fat Boy, and then it was Jason.
The men Jabri is referring to are Jason Aquino and Blaine Fat Boy Jiggets.
Blaine Jiggets and Jason Aquino were actually childhood friends, and they grew up together.
Basically, they wanted me to do a job for him, help him rob some marijuana from this Justin cat.
The Justin cat Jabri is talking about is Justin Cosby. But according to Jabri, the trio's plan to rob Justin went horribly from the get-go.
Jabri, Jason, and Blaine lured Justin into the basement of the Kirkland house. When they were in the basement, they demanded that Justin show them the weed. Justin showed them the weed. They tried to take it from him.
They began to scuffle because Justin wasn't gonna let go of the marijuana without getting paid. Somewhere during the scuffle, Justin was shot 1 time.
It's an incredible story, but Jabri's adamant he didn't pull the trigger.
Out of nowhere, Fat Boy pulls a gun out, pops him.
So Fat Boy had the gun?
Yeah.
Armed with this information, police arrest Jason Aquino and Blaine Jiggets in New York City and charge the trio with Justin's murder. On March 16, 2010, Brittany Smith is arrested and charged with accessory after the fact, illegal possession of a firearm, and willfully misleading a police officer. The arrest rocks the Harvard community.
When I found out that the killer was not a Harvard student, yet he was staying at Harvard, using all of Harvard's amenities, and he had staged this robbery and had set up my son, I was flabbergasted.
As is the university. 2 weeks before their graduation, Brittany, as well as her friend Shaniqua Campbell, are expelled for their alleged drug use and potential involvement in Justin's murder.
I couldn't imagine having a free ride at an Ivy League university and ruining, graduating, and going on with my life to do great things over a crime 2 weeks before I graduate.
But even after her arrest, it's clear Brittany's love for Jabri trumps any doors a Harvard degree could have opened up for her.
They're writing each other, and she wanted to marry him at some point, which is shocking.
On April 6, 2011, nearly 2 years after the shooting, Jabri Copney's murder trial begins in Woburn, Massachusetts. With Brittany refusing to turn on him, Jabri enters the courtroom looking cool, collected, and confident he'll walk out a free man.
I just wanted to go over there and wring his freaking neck. But I knew that would not bring my son back.
In their opening statements, prosecutors assert that on May 18, 2009, Jabri Copney, Blaine Jiggets, and Jason Aquino conspired to rob Justin Cosby.
Justin had come to Harvard to sell some marijuana to someone he thought was a student there. And it was a large quantity.
Jabri contacted Justin to purchase marijuana. Justin was lured down into Kirkland House.
Justin was not a big drug dealer. Apparently, he thought he could make some quick money.
So, homeboy, you got that for me?
Yeah, I got that. You got that for me?
Yeah, you ain't gonna see it until I see what I need to see, partner.
All right. You wanna see us here? What's up? Where the money at?
They tried to take the marijuana from him, so he put up a fight.
Give me the mother bag. You pulling it out like you about to leave? You ain't about to do nothing with it. You're not about to take this bag from me.
And at that point, Jabri Copney shot him.
Don't pull a gun out if you're not about to use it. If you're not about to use it, don't pull it out. You ain't gonna do nothing. Oh, it's counting. Go.
After the shooting, the three men immediately went back to Brittany's room, and Jabri Copney told Brittany to hide the gun.
Prosecutors say Brittany, fueled by her love for Jabri, did exactly as she was told. She hid the gun in the dorm room next to hers and fled on a bus with the three men back to New York.
Brittany was totally in this up to her neck. She provided the venue, the place where she allowed her boyfriend to come with his friends and load a gun in her room.
But without corroborating testimony, the state's case is largely circumstantial. Prosecutors give Brittany one last chance to come clean.
The prosecutor said, "You'd do anything to help Jabri join Copney, wouldn't you?" And Brittany replied, "I've already tried everything and it failed. And now we're here."
That's what people do when they're in love. You do things for people that you're in love with that you wouldn't typically do.
Fortunately for prosecutors, Brittany's friend Shaniqua isn't quite so love-struck.
The deal that Shaniqua took was that she wouldn't be prosecuted if she gave the police truthful information about the crime.
Taking the stand, Shaniqua admits she regularly sold drugs at Harvard and was well aware of her competition, Justin Cosby.
Shaniqua was the one that apparently suggested to Jabri to set up Justin, as she thought he would be an easy target.
Shaniqua says Jabri agreed. It's an explosive revelation, but it pales in comparison to what Shaniqua reveals next.
Was your relationship strictly business, selling weed as it were?
In the beginning it was, but after a while, I mean, we were smoking weed, but anytime we smoked weed, it led to other things.
It came out that Shaniqua had actually been sleeping with Jabri.
That was probably really hard for Brittany to swallow, that her best friend was sleeping with her boyfriend.
The love relationship between Brittany and Jabri was one-sided. Brittany loved Jabri. She would do whatever she could to help him. Jabri's love to Brittany, or what she experienced the love, was really just something for his own benefit.
But in Cross, Jabri's defense attorneys argue Shaniqua can't be trusted as a witness. Not only had she been quick to cooperate with police to avoid prosecution, she also had a long history of unscrupulous behavior.
Shaniqua was feeling some sort of infringement on her business because of Justin. And there was some manipulation on her part to actually get Justin out of the business a bit.
As for the actual shooting, Jabri's attorneys argue that Blaine Fatboy Jiggets was the real trigger man.
The defense was that the actual shooter was Blaine Jiggets.
With everyone in the case pointing their fingers at each other, some observers wonder if the defense may have sown the seeds of reasonable doubt. But prosecutors still have one more witness left to call, and what she says will send shockwaves through the courtroom. Inside a Woburn, Massachusetts courtroom, prosecutors have asserted Jabri Copney murdered Justin Cosby in a robbery gone awry, and then used his girlfriend, Harvard senior Brittany Smith, as a pawn to conceal his crime and hide the evidence.
Things like this just don't happen at an Ivy League school.
While Jabri's defense attorneys don't dispute his involvement in the crime, they argue Jabri's pal, Blaine Fatboy Jiggets, is the real trigger man. With so many fingers pointing in so many directions, a not guilty verdict seems like a done deal. That is until prosecutors call a state forensic expert to the stand. She tells the jury that a DNA swab of the murder weapon had indeed come back positive.
We were actually able to obtain a full DNA profile.
And who was that profile of, please?
It matched the defendant.
They did find that Copney's DNA was on the gun.
It's a damning piece of evidence, erasing any and all doubt as to just who murdered Justin Cosby.
Jabri, he's the person that actually pulled the trigger. DNA doesn't lie. And his DNA was found on the weapon.
On April 22, 2011, jurors retired to deliberate Jabri Copney's fate. Hours later, they returned with their verdict: guilty.
He's sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
When he shot my son in the belly, it should have been a double murder rap, because that shot went straight to my heart, and it killed me also. I hope he never sees the light of day again.
6 months later, Brittany Smith pleads guilty to being an accessory after the fact, illegal possession of a firearm, willfully misleading a grand jury, and willfully misleading a police officer. She is sentenced to 3 years in prison.
Brittany really got a slap on the wrist. She was really the nucleus of this whole catastrophe.
If Brittany had owned up to her part in the beginning and told the truth, that she probably would not be in jail right now.
For his role in the murder, Blaine Jiggets receives a sentence of 9 to 12 years in prison. Jason Aquino receives 18 to 20 years. Despite her alleged involvement in Justin's murder, Shaniqua herself manages to avoid prison time.
Shaniqua really orchestrated all this thing. She's the one that was sleeping with Jabri, yet she's the one that turned, and the prosecution said, "We want your testimony. You get no time."
While it's a verdict Justin's family still struggles with, they're not the only ones who lost out in this tragedy. For Brittany Smith, a young woman with so much promise, her blind love for a bad man ultimately cost her a life many aspire to, yet few can attain: the prestigious life of a bona fide Harvard graduate.
Brittany had her whole life in front of her, and Jabri did nothing but weigh that down. She could have dated anyone she wanted to, but she chose Jabri, and no one knows why, and that's something that she will regret for the rest of her life.
The Silent Threshold, a novel based on a true tragedy. Chapter 1. The Kansas Farm Boy. Antioch, California, always felt like a place where the sun was trying to bleach the secrets out of the pavement. It was a sprawling community northeast of San Francisco, a city of 130,000 souls, caught between the industrial breath of the Delta and the quiet, dusty hills. Relis Carlisman III was a man who belonged to the soil, even if he spent his days surrounded by the hum of telecommunications equipment. He was a Kansas farm boy at heart, stoic, broad-shouldered, and possessed of a work ethic that felt like a relic from a different century. He had joined the army straight out of high school, a boy looking for a way to serve a country he believed in, with the same simplicity he believed in the harvest. By 2016, Relis was the anchor of a house that was slowly drifting out to sea. He was a man who scraped an honest living out of a world that felt increasingly dishonest. He had 5 children, 3 girls with his current wife, Kathleen, a son named Scott from a previous marriage, and a young boy who was the light of his tired eyes. But the house on the quiet street in Antioch was not the sanctuary Relis had envisioned. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stale food and the silent, vibrating tension of a marriage that had died years ago. Kathleen Ragnaby, they were estranged, living under the same roof like 2 ghosts haunting different hallways. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations reduced to the logistics of child rearing and the mounting pile of bills. Relis worked. He worked until his hands were calloused and his eyes were rimmed with red. He was protective, perhaps to a fault. He hated the culture of the streets that bled into the neighborhood, the drugs, the easy violence, the waywardness of the youth. He especially hated marijuana, seeing it as the first step toward the abyss. He didn't know that the abyss was already sitting at his kitchen table. Chapter 2. Scott Eastman was 21, but he looked like he was made of spare parts and nervous energy. He was scrawny, short, and spoke with a cadence that made people lean in, trying to find the rhythm in his words. He was a young man who lived in the margins, rarely making eye contact, his presence in the house as unobtrusive as a shadow. But Scott was watching. While Relis was at work, Scott observed Kathleen. He saw the way she moved, the way she looked at her phone with a secret smile, and the way she treated his father with a cold, calculated disdain. To Scott, Kathleen wasn't just his stepmother. In the dark, claustrophobic theater of his mind, she was something else entirely. Scott's world was digital and hidden. He spent hours on the internet. His searches a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a psychological labyrinth. He was obsessed with the idea of a life where Relis didn't exist, a life where he could protect Kathleen, where he could be the man she actually wanted. The tension in the house was a physical thing. Relis would come home, see the disarray, the dishes piled high, the clothes scattered like fallen leaves, and the arguments would begin. "Is it too much to ask for a clean house?" Relis would bark, his voice a low thunder. "You're never here, Relis," Kathleen would retort, her voice a jagged blade. "You want a maid? Hire one with the money you don't have." Scott would listen from his room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He blamed his father. He blamed Relis for the clutter, for the unhappiness, and for the way Kathleen's eyes seemed to go dim whenever Relis entered a room. He began to search, not for jobs or for a way out, but for tools. He searched for Harrington and Richardson .2 to revolt. He searched for life insurance payouts. He was 21 years old, and he was planning a rebirth. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Motivation. Kathleen Ragnaby was a woman who knew the value of a dollar, especially a dollar she didn't have to work for. For 10 years, she had been a drain on Relis's resources. She had affairs, numerous ones, and had even borne a child with another man. Yet she remained under Relis's roof, letting him pay the bills, letting him provide the stability she refused to create herself. She was conniving, a manipulator who painted Relis as the villain to anyone who would listen. To her friends and co-workers, she was the victim of a lecherous, cheating husband. In reality, it was Relis who was being walked over, a good-hearted man who couldn't bring himself to abandon the children, even if it meant living in a domestic purgatory. But Kathleen was looking for an exit strategy. A divorce was messy and expensive. A death, however, was a different matter entirely. Relis had a life insurance policy, $1 million. She looked into the specifics of the policy, the clauses, the timeline of a payout. She didn't know that Scott was watching her searches, too. Or perhaps, in some dark, unspoken corner of their shared domestic life, they were moving in a silent, synchronized dance toward the same conclusion. Chapter 4. The Day the Sun Went. Cold. June 25, 2016. Started like any other Saturday. The California heat was already rising by 10 in the morning. Kathleen took the two youngest children out for a day of shopping, a routine escape from the house. Relis was home. He was always home on the weekends, trying to catch up on the repairs that never stayed fixed. Scott was with his friends down the street, playing video games. It was his routine, his alibi. But as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Scott felt the pull of the house. He told his friends he had to return the family car. He promised he'd be back in 10 minutes. He didn't go back in 10 minutes. Scott parked the car a block away, avoiding the cameras he knew were there, avoiding the eyes of the neighbors. He walked toward the house, his scrawny frame hidden under a hoodie despite the heat. In his pocket was an H&R Model 999 revolver on antiquated piece of machinery, a top-break 9-shot .22 caliber that felt heavy and cold against his leg. He entered through the garage. Relis was there, or perhaps he met Scott at the threshold of the kitchen. "What are you doing back?" Relis might have asked. Maybe he smelled the faint, skunky odor of marijuana on Scott's clothes. Maybe he started the lecture one last time. "Are you high again?" "I told you, Scott, not in this house. You're out of here if I catch you again." Relis, ever the father, ever the man who didn't see his own son as a threat, turned his back. He walked toward the kitchen, his mind probably already on the next task, the next bill, the next argument. Scott raised the revolver. The .22 is a small bullet. It's used for target practice, for small rodents. It's a quiet caliber, but at close range, it is absolute. Scott pulled the trigger. The first shot missed, or perhaps it was the second one. Bullet went wild, punching a clean, straight hole through the television hanging on the living room wall. But the other found its mark. It struck Relis in the back of the head, right at the base of the skull. The Kansas farm boy collapsed in the threshold between the garage and the kitchen. There was no struggle. There was only this sudden, violent intrusion of lead into a brain that had spent 45 years trying to solve the problems of a family that didn't want him. Scott didn't stay to watch him die. He ran. He ran back to the car, fumbling with the revolver. As he tried to clear the spent casings, his hands shaking, one of the small brass shells fell into the spare tire well of the trunk. He drove back to his friends. He played video games. He bought condoms he didn't need, with money he didn't have, trying to create a timeline of normalcy. Chapter 5. The Return. When Kathleen returned with the children, the house was silent. It was her daughter Amia who found him first. Her scream was a jagged tear in the suburban quiet. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen ran in. She saw Relis on the floor. There was blood, so much blood coagulated on the linoleum. Brain matter was splattered against the doorframe. She called 911, her voice hysterical. "Is he alive? Am I? Is he alive?" Officer Ramirez was the first to arrive. He walked into a scene of chaos outside and a scene of grisly stillness inside. At first, he thought it was an accident. Relis was a big man. Maybe he'd had a stroke, hit his head on the counter, and bled out. The EMTs arrived, preparing to transport the body. But as they lifted Relis by his feet, something fell from his clothing. Something small, something metallic. Officer Ramirez knelt down. He looked at the small, mangled piece of lead. "That's a bullet fragment," he whispered. The medical call became a homicide investigation in the blink of an eye. Chapter 6. The Detectives. Corporal James Colley and Corporal Adrian Gonzalez were the hunters sent into the ruins of the Eastman family. Colley was the veteran, a man who had closed countless murder cases. Gonzalez was the newer detective, sharp and hungry, with a background in property crimes. They walked through the house, noting the contrast. The outside was a nice bedroom community home. The inside was a wreck. "Not your cleanest house," Colley remarked, stepping over a pile of laundry. "Stale food, dishes everywhere. This isn't a home invasion. Nothing's missing. No forced entry." "Execution style," Gonzalez added, looking at the blood spatter, back of the head. Someone he knew, someone he let in. They started outside. In the backyard, they found a backpack. Inside was a wallet, marijuana, and the driver's license of Scott Eastman. The detectives looked at each other. The son's backpack was outside, but the son was supposedly at a friend's house. The investigation turned toward the family. They went to the hospital, where Relis lay in the ICU, a breathing tube, his only connection to the world of the living. He was brain dead, a tragedy in a hospital gown. Carly interviewed Kathleen. She was quick to point the finger at Relis's supposed side women. She painted herself as the long-suffering wife. But Callie noticed the way she talked about the insurance. He noticed the way she seemed more concerned with the payout than the man on the ventilator. Then, there was Scott. Scott came off as unassuming. Callie would later recall. Scrawny, weird cadence, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Scott told them he was at a friend's. He told them he had a strained relationship with his dad but loved his step. He lied about his phone. He lied about his money. He lied about his movements. Chapter 7. The Echo in the Machine. The break in the case didn't come from a confession. It came from an Echo ATM, a kiosk where people sell old cell phones for quick cash. Scott had told the detectives he didn't have a phone. He said he'd lost it. But Gonzalez, the property crime expert, knew about the Echo kiosks. He called the company. They had video. And there was Scott Eastman, 5 hours after his father was shot, selling a phone at a kiosk. He used the ID he claimed he didn't have. He looked into the camera with the eyes of a man who thought he was smarter than the world. The detectives recovered the phone. It was a goldmine of darkness. There were hundreds of searches for the exact weapon used, the H&R .22. There were searches for ammunition. And then, there were the mom searches. Scott's phone was filled with thousands of searches for incestuous pornography involving He had photos of Kathy Nurska, photos she had sent to other men saved on his device. The motive wasn't just money. It was a twisted, Shakespearean obsession. Scott believed that if Relis was gone, he could have the money and the woman. He believed he could step into his father's shoes in the most horrific way imaginable. Chapter 8. The Final Threshold. The arrest was a quiet affair. Despite the full gear of the police team, they went to the house. Kathleen opened the door, and the officers flooded in. Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III. Scott stood up calmly. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. As they led him away, Callie looked at Kathleen. He told her the truth, that her son was in love with her, that he'd killed his father to run off into the sunset with her. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror. It was bizarre, as the detectives described it. It was a look of vanity, of a woman wondering if she really was that captivating. In the end, the jury saw through the unassuming act. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. Kathleen was never charged. There was no evidence she pulled the trigger, and no proof she had asked Scott to do it. She stayed in the house for a while. The $1 million eventually split among the children, excluding the one who had murdered the provider. Relis Eastman, the Kansas farm boy who just wanted to keep his kids on track, was gone. He wouldn't walk his daughters down the aisle. He wouldn't meet his grandkids. He had brought Scott into the world, and 21 years later, Scott had taken him out of it. The house in Antioch remained, a quiet suburban shell on a quiet suburban street, holding the memory of a boy who loved his stepmother more than his father's life, and a man who was too good for the world he tried so hard to save. Epilogue. The sun still bleaches the pavement in Antioch. The Delta breeze still carries the scent of salt and industry. And in a California prison, Scott Eastman sits in a cell, a scrawny man with a weird cadence, waiting for a sunset that will never come. The Weight of Whispers. A novel of obsession and betrayal in Antioch. Prologue. The Golden State's shadow. Antioch, California, was a city built on the promises of the sun. Situated northeast of San Francisco, it was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to believe in the American dreamer. Bedroom community where the lawns were mostly green. The schools were supposedly good, and the fog of the bay stayed just far enough away. But the sun in Antioch was different. It didn't just illuminate, it baked. It drew the moisture out of the earth and the patience out of its people. And for Relis Eastman, the sun was a constant reminder of the farm he had left behind in Kansas. He was a man of the soil who had traded the plains for the suburbs, the army for telecommunications, and a quiet life for a house full of secrets. On June 25, 2016, the heat was particularly stifling. It was a day that felt like a held breath of silence that was about to break. Chapter 1. The House on the Corner. The Eastman home looked unremarkable from the curb. It was a sturdy house, the kind a hard-working man provides for his wife and 5 children. Relis Eastman was that man. At 55, he was the pillar of the household, a workaholic, a provider, and a disciplinarian whose moral compass was as rigid as a military barracks. But inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stagnation. Kathleen Rognaby sat in the living room, watching the dust motes dance in the light. She was Relis's wife, but the term felt like a title she had outgrown years ago. Their marriage was a ghost ship drifting, hollow, and kept afloat only by the shared roof and the children. They slept in separate rooms. They spoke in transactions. Kathleen was a woman who moved through the house like a trapped bird. She was beautiful in a way that seemed weary, her eyes always searching for an exit. For 10 years, she had lived under Relis's shadow, resenting his rules, his frugality, and his refusal to see the woman she had become. She had sought solace in other arms, other men, even bearing a child that wasn't his. Yet, they remained locked in this domestic purgatory. "Mom, can we go?" It was Amia, her daughter. Kathleen blinked, pulling herself back from the edge of a dark thought. "Yes," Kathleen said, her voice a dry rasp. "Let's go shopping. We need to get out of this house." As they left, Kathleen didn't look back. She didn't see the figure watching from the upstairs window. Scott Eastman, Relis's 21-year-old son from a previous marriage, watched his stepmother walk to the car. Scott was a scrawny young man with a gaze that lingered too long. To the world, he was just a quiet kid who played too many video games and smoked a bit of marijuana. But inside Scott's mind, a storm was brewing. He didn't see Kathleen as a mother. He saw her as a prize. He saw her as a woman trapped by a tyrant. The same tyrant who demanded Scott get a job, stop the drugs, and be a man. In Scott's twisted reality, Relis wasn't a father. He was an obstacle. Chapter 2. The Return. The shopping trip lasted all day. Kathleen moved through the stores with a frantic energy, buying things they didn't need with money they didn't really have. It was a way to feel alive, to feel like she had some control. By the time they returned to the quiet street in Antioch, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows over the driveways. Amia ran ahead, the front door swinging open. Kathleen followed, her arms full of bags. Then came the scream. It wasn't a scream of annoyance or a child's tantrum. It was a sound of primal terror. Kathleen dropped the bags, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped animal. "Mom, what is going on?" Amia shrieked, her face pale as a sheet. Kathleen's young son looked at her, his eyes wide, his voice trembling. "Mom, there's blood everywhere." Kathleen pushed past them, her feet heavy as lead. She reached the threshold of the kitchen, and the world stopped. There, lying in the doorway between the garage and the kitchen, was Relis. He was face down, his body unnaturally still. A dark, thick pool of red was spreading across the linoleum, reaching for the cabinets like a rising tide. "Relis," she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't answer. She didn't go to him. She couldn't. The smell of copper and something metallic filled the air. She turned, her instincts screaming for her to get the children out. She ran to the phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. 911. "What is your emergency?" "My husband. He's on the floor. There's blood. Is he alive? Oh God. Is he alive?" Kathleen's voice was a jagged mess of sobs and gasps. The dispatcher's voice was a calm anchor in a sea of chaos. "Ma'am, stay right there. Help is on the way. Can you go to him? Can you help him?" "No," Kathleen cried, stepping back into the sunlight of the front yard, where the air was hot but clean. "I don't want to go in there. I can't." Chapter 3. The Uniform and the Unknown. Officer Ramirez was the first on the scene. He had been across town when the call came in, a medical emergency, possibly a fall. But as he pulled up to the Eastman house and saw the family huddled on the lawn, their faces masks of horror, he knew this was something else. He walked through the front door, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. "Mr. Eastman." He turned into the kitchen and stopped. He had seen death before, but the sheer volume of blood was staggering. It was coagulated, thick, and in the center of it, he could see something that didn't belong on a kitchen floor. Brain matter. He knelt beside the man. To his shock, he heard a faint, wet rattle. "We got you. Hang in there, buddy," Ramirez whispered. The EMTs arrived shortly after. At first, the working theory was a tragic accident. A man of 55, perhaps a heart attack, a fall against the sharp edge of the counter. It happened. But as they lifted Relis's limp body onto the gurney, his shirt rode up. Ramirez leaned in closer. There, embedded in the flesh at the base of the skull, was a small, jagged piece of metal. "Wait," Ramirez said, his voice cold. Everyone stopped. He looked at the tiny entry wound. It was clean, precise. That's a bullet fragment, he said to the room. The medical emergency was over. The homicide investigation had begun. Chapter 4. The Detectives. Corporal James Colley was a man who lived for the hunt, a veteran homicide detective with the Antioch Police Department. He was used to the midnight calls that tore him away from his own life. When his phone vibrated on the nightstand, he didn't need to check the ID. He arrived at the scene and met his partner for the case, Adrian Gonzalez. Gonzalez was newer, a property crimes detective whom Colley was mentoring. What do we have? Colley asked, stepping under the yellow crime scene tape. Relis Eastman, Gonzalez replied, shot in the back of the head. He's at the ICU, but it doesn't look good. The house is, well, you should see for yourself. They walked inside. The contrast between the tidy exterior and the interior was jarring. The house was in a state of advanced neglect. Stale food sat on the counters. Piles of laundry were strewn across the furniture. It was the home of people who had given up on the details. Look at the TV, Colley noted, pointing to the living room wall. There was a hole in the screen, a perfect, circular puncture. Straightened shot, Colley mused. Small caliber, maybe a .22. It's a target gun, a rodent gun, not usually what you see in an execution-style hit. Unless the shooter didn't want a loud noise, Gonzalez added. They walked the perimeter, the flashlight beams cutting through the dark. In the backyard, near the fence, something caught Gonzalez's eye, a backpack. He zipped it open. Inside were clothes, a pipe, a small bag of marijuana, and a wallet. He flipped the wallet open and pulled out a driver's license. Scott Eastman, Gonzalez read. The son. Colley looked at the house. A son's backpack in the yard while the father is shot in the kitchen. That's not a coincidence. That's a lead. Chapter 5. The Icy Veins of Greed. As Relis lay brain-dead in the hospital, his life supported only by the rhythmic hum of a ventilator, the detectives began to peel back the layers of the Eastman family. They started with Kathleen. She sat in the interview room. Her eyes He was a difficult man, she told Colley. He cheated. He had women on the side. Our marriage was over a long time ago. He discovered that Relis was the one paying the bills, keeping the roof over her head despite her betrayals. Then came the call from the hospital social worker. Detective, the worker said, her voice hushed. The family is asking about the life insurance. Specifically, Kathleen. She seems very eager to know when he can be declared dead. The policy was worth $1 million. A million reasons to pull the trigger, Colley whispered to Gonzalez. But Kathleen had an alibi. She was shopping. She was with the kids. She was on camera miles away at the time of the shooting. She couldn't have pulled the trigger. So who did? Gonzalez asked. The boyfriend a hired hit. Or someone closer, Colley said, his thoughts returning to the backpack in the yard. Chapter 6. The Sickness in the Silence. Scott Eastman was brought in for questioning. He was a scrawny kid who wouldn't meet their eyes. He spoke in a strange, halting cadence, his fingers twitching in his lap. I use marijuana, Scott admitted when confronted with the backpack. I leave it outside so my dad won't see it. He hates drugs. He'd kick me out if he knew. Where were you that night, Scott? Colley asked, leaning in. With friends, playing video games. I left for a bit to return the car. My dad doesn't like me driving at night. Did you see him? No. I parked a block away and walked back to my friend's house. I didn't want him to catch me out. It was a plausible story, the kind a rebellious son tells a strict father. But as the interview progressed, Scott began to slip. He mentioned buying a box of condoms at a store. With what money? Scott Gonzalez asked. Your wallet was in the backpack, in the backyard. Scott froze. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I had some cash, Scott stammered. I saw an Echo ATM. Gonzalez's ears perked up. He knew about Echo ATM kiosks, where you can sell your phone for instant cash. Why mention the ATM, Scott? No reason, just saw it. After Scott left, Gonzalez didn't go home. He went to the Echo ATM. And there he was, Scott Eastman, hours before the murder, selling a cell phone he claimed he didn't have, using an ID he claimed was in his lost wallet. They recovered the phone from the machine. When the forensic team cracked the data, The romance of the Eastman house was finally revealed in all its grotesque detail. Chapter 7. The Harvest of Horror. The phone was a window into a nightmare. Jesus, Gonzalez said, staring at the screen in the darkened precinct. The search history wasn't just about guns, though. It was filled with hundreds of searches for H&R .22 revolvers and ballistics of a .22 to the head. It was the other searches that turned Gonzalez's stomach. Hundreds of searches for incestuous pornography, specifically stepmother fantasies. Scott hadn't just been a lonely kid. He was a man consumed by an obsessive, delusional love for Kathleen. He had saved the risque photos she sent to other men onto his own phone. He had convinced himself that if Relis were gone, the $1 million would be theirs. He and Kathleen would run away together. He would be the man she truly wanted. He didn't kill his father for the money, Kali realized, looking at the data. He killed his father to save his stepmother. He thought this was a love story. They checked the neighbor's surveillance footage. It showed Scott's car parking at 8:53 p.m. It showed him walking toward the house, not away from it. It showed him returning minutes later, fumbling with the trunk of the car, likely hiding the antique H&R 999 revolver. The romance was a delusion born of isolation in a broken mind. Chapter 8. The Arrest. The arrest was a silent affair. The police arrived at the house in full gear. Kathleen opened the door, her face a mask of confusion. "Where's Scott?" Callie asked. The young man stood up from the couch. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He looked almost relieved, as if the weight of the secret was finally too much for his scrawny shoulders to bear. As they led him away in handcuffs, Callie turned to Kathleen. "You know he's in love with you, right?" Callie said, his voice flat. "He did this for you. He thought you'd run off into the sunset together on Relis's blood money." Kathleen didn't cry. She didn't scream in horror. She simply looked at the door where Scott had disappeared, a strange, unreadable expression on her face, a look that was almost vanity. "Did he really say that?" she whispered. Epilogue. The cost of the dream. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. He would spend the rest of his days in a concrete box, far from the son of Antioch and the woman he had murdered for. Kathleen was never charged. There was no evidence she had asked him to do it. No proof she had manipulated the boy's fractured mind. She walked away with a portion of the insurance money, moving on to a new life, leaving the wreckage of the Eastman family behind. Relis's daughters were left with a hole that no amount of money could fill. "I won't have my dad to walk me down the aisle," one of them said during the trial. "I won't have him." In the end, Antioch remained a town of 130,000 people. The sun continued to bake the earth, and the houses on the corners continued to hold their secrets. But for the Eastmans, the silence was finally absolute. The romance was dead, the father was gone, and the son was a ghost in a cage. Murder is never a love story. It is only the end of one. The Fragile Threshold. A novel of Antioch. Chapter 1. The House of Static. The sun in Antioch does not merely shine. It is a dry, relentless heat that bakes the suburban streets until the asphalt ripples like a mirage. On the outside, the Eastman house on Bigelow Drive looked like any other beige sanctuary of middle-class normalcy. But inside, the air was heavy with the scent of unwashed dishes and the static electricity of a dying marriage. Relis Eastman was a man built from the red dirt of Kansas. He carried the prairie in his steady, unyielding rhythm that didn't fit the frantic pace of Northern California. He was a man of wires and signals, a telecommunications worker who spent his days ensuring the world could talk to itself, while he returned home to a house where no one spoke to him. Kathleen Rognaby moved through the house like a ghost who still held the keys to the pantry. She was beautiful in a way that felt tired, a sharp-edged beauty that had been honed by years of disappointment. They slept in separate rooms, now a tactical withdrawal. The hallway between their doors was a no man's land, a DMZ where the only things exchanged were cold glances and the occasional, biting remark about bills or the children. In the shadows of this domestic Cold War sat Scott. Scott Eastman was 21, but he looked like a stiff breeze could knock him into the next county. He was scrawny, with eyes that seemed to perceive a different frequency of reality. He was Relis's son from a previous life, a relic of a time before the silence took over. To Relis, Scott was a disappointment wrapped in a haze of marijuana smoke. To Scott, Relis was the great wall of Antioch that stood between him and the only light he knew. That light was Kathleen. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Orchard. Scott's love for his stepmother was not the clean, wholesome love of a son. It was a fever. It was a jagged, desperate thing that grew in the dark corners of his mind, fueled by the risque photos he found on her phone, and the way she looked at him with a pity that he mistook for affection. He watched her from the edges of rooms. He memorized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was stressed about money. He saw the way she manipulated Relis, the way she bled him dry, as the neighbors would later whisper. But in Scott's eyes, Kathleen was a captive. She was a queen trapped in a tower of unwashed laundry and unpaid invoices, and Relis was the jailer. "He doesn't appreciate you," Scott would whisper to the empty air of his bedroom, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Late at night, while the rest of the house hummed with the sound of the air conditioner, Scott's face was illuminated by the blue glow of his monitor. His search history was a map of his descent. Harrington and Richardson, ballistics of a .2, to life insurance payout timeline. And then, the darker searches, the ones that made his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. The fantasies of a world where Relis was gone, where the $1 million policy landed in Kathleen's lap, and where she would finally see Scott not as a scrawny kid, but as her savior, her partner, her everything. Chapter 3. The Price of a Soul. Kathleen wasn't an innocent bystander in the wreckage of their lives. She was a woman who had learned that beauty was a currency, and she was spending it as fast as she could. She was researching the insurance policy. 3 weeks before the end, she sat at the same kitchen table where Relis ate his lonely breakfasts, clicking through the clauses of his mortality. $1 million. It was a number that could buy a new life. It could buy a life away from the ledge. She called her husband. It could buy a life where she didn't have to sleep in a separate room. She didn't ask Scott to do it, not in so many words, but in the quiet moments, in the way she complained about releases, in the way she leaned on Scott's shoulder when she cried about their marital problems. She was planting seeds in a very fertile, very broken mind. She had an alibi. She had the children. She had a shopping trip planned. She was a master of the exit strategy. Chapter 4. The Threshold. June 25, 2016. The heat was a physical weight. Relis was in the garage. He liked the garage. It was the one place where the chaos of the house couldn't reach him. But then he saw Scott. "Are you high again?" Relis's voice was like gravel. Scott stood there, his hand trembling in his pocket. The Harrington and Richardson 999 NNT, a relic, much like his father was heavy. It was a break-top revolver, a piece of history intended for target practice, for small rodents. "Don't lie to me," Relis said, turning his back. It was the ultimate insult, to turning of the back. It was the sign that Relis no longer even feared his son. He was just tired of him. Relis walked toward the threshold of the kitchen. He was going to get a glass of water. He was going to continue his life of quiet desperation. Scott followed. The world narrowed to the back of his father's head. The Kansas farm boy, who had survived the army, survived the cutthroat world of telecommunications, but couldn't survive the rot inside his own home. Shazam, Scott thought, though he didn't say it. Everything changes now. The .22 is a small bullet. It doesn't make a loud noise. It's a polite kind of murder. One shot. The threshold of the kitchen became a slaughterhouse. Blood and brain mattered the physical substance of Relis's thoughts. His memories of Kansas, his love for his daughters splattered against the doorframe. Relis fell. He didn't die immediately. He was a workaholic to the end. His heart kept beating, trying to finish the job of living even as his brain was shattered. Chapter 5. The Echoes of Antioch. Detective Kali arrived to a scene of domestic horror masked as a medical accident. The pool of blood was coagulated, a thick, dark lake on the linoleum. He must have hit his head, the EMTS said. But Kali saw the fragment, a piece of lead that didn't belong in a kitchen. From that moment, the medical call became a hunt. They found the backpack in the yard, Scott's ID, a trail of breadcrumbs left by a boy who wanted to be caught, perhaps, or a boy who was too scrawny in spirit to cover his tracks. At the hospital, Relis lay on a ventilator. He was brain dead, a machine doing the work his son had ended. Kathleen sat by the bed, the grieving widow, already calculating the $1 million payout. She signed the papers to pull the plug with a steady hand. It was the final divorce. Chapter 6. The Kiosk of Secrets. Detective Gonzalez was the cell phone guru. He knew that in the 21st century, our souls are stored in silicon. Scott had sold his phone to an Echo ATM, a kiosk for stolen and discarded dreams. When Gonzalez opened that machine, he found the map of Scott's madness, The searches for the gun, the searches for the ammo, and the hundreds of searches for his stepmother, the incestuous fantasies that turned a murder into a Shakespearean tragedy of the suburbs. "I like you the best," Scott Cully said in the interrogation room, his voice a velvet trap. "I know you feel best when you're being honest." But Scott's voice became meek and little. He looked like a cornered cat. He realized that the sunset he wanted to run off into with Kathleen was actually a neon light in a prison cell. Chapter 7. The sunset that never came. The arrest was loud, banging on the door, police in full gear, the shattering of the last illusions. "You know he's in love with you," Callie told Kathleen as they led Scott away in irons. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror, it was bizarre, a flicker of pride, a moment of realization that she had been that powerful, that she could turn a son against a father, with nothing but a few risque photos and $1 million dream. She was never charged. There was no paper trail for a broken heart or a manipulative glance. She got the insurance money, split with the children. She got her freedom. Scott got 55 years. In the end, Rellis Eastman was a good man who worked too hard for a family that didn't want him. And Scott was a boy who thought a bullet could bridge the distance between a lonely bedroom and a stepmother's embrace. Antioch remains hot. The sun still punishes the streets. And on Bigelow Drive, the threshold of the kitchen is clean. But the echoes of that point to two shots still ring in the silence of the night. Epilogue. The daughter's grief. Amia will never have a father to walk her down the aisle. She won't have him to meet her children. She is left with the memory of the straggle look on her brother's face and the blood on the floor. The money is there, in the bank, cold and silent. $1 million. The price of a father, the cost of a fantasy, the bitter end of the Eastman line. Shadows of devotion. The Antioch tragedy. Prologue. The sound of glass shattering. The California sun was a relentless judge, beating down on the asphalt of Antioch with a dry, unforgiving heat. For Kathleen Rognaby, the day had been an exercise in the mundane shopping bags filled with the necessities of a family of 7, the mindless chatter of her children, and the lingering weight of a marriage that had long since turned into a hollow shell. She didn't know, as she pulled the car into the driveway of their home on Bigelow Drive, that the world she had carefully manipulated for a decade was about to implode. The silence of the house was the first warning. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a resting home. It was a heavy, stagnant quiet that smelled of copper and stale air. Then came the scream. It was Amia. Her voice, usually bright and youthful, was a jagged shard of glass cutting through the afternoon. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen stepped through the threshold, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her young son stood near the kitchen, his face a mask of primal confusion. His eyes were wide, reflecting a horror he couldn't name. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's blood everywhere." In that moment, the romanticized version of her life, the one she had built on a foundation of secrets and in its place was the cold, hard reality of a kitchen floor slick with the lifeblood of Rellis Eastman. Chapter 1. The Farm Boy and the Siren. To understand the end, one must look at the beginning. Rellis Eastman was a man carved from the soil of Kansas. He carried the discipline of the farm and the rigidity of the U.S. Army in his spine. He was a man of simple truths, hard work, providing for one's family, and an absolute intolerance for the rot of the modern world, specifically the drugs and lawlessness that seeped into the edges of Antioch. He was a provider, a telecommunications worker, who saw himself as the pillar of a large, sprawling family. But pillars, no matter how strong, can be eroded by a slow, persistent poison. That poison was the state of his marriage to Kathleen. Years ago, their union might have been described as a whirlwind. Kathleen was the contrast to his stoicism, vibrant, perhaps a bit chaotic, and possessing a magnetic pull that Rellis, for all his military discipline, couldn't resist. But by 2016, the magnetism had become a trap. They lived under the same roof, but they were strangers navigating a minefield. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations reduced to the logistics of a household in disarray. Outside, the house looked like any other in the suburban community. Inside, it was a testament to a domestic war of attrition. Dishes piled high, clothes scattered like casualties, and the smell of neglect permeated every room. Kathleen had begun to paint Rellis as the villain in her own internal narrative. She spoke of him as a lech, a man with women on the side, a husband who failed to see her. Whether these were truths or the justifications of a woman already looking for an exit was a question only the shadows of that house could answer. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Obsession. In the corner of this fractured home lived Scott Eastman. At 21, Scott was a ghost in his own life. Scrawny, awkward, and possessing a cadence of speech that made people look twice. He was the son Relis struggled to understand. Relis wanted a man of iron. He got a boy of smoke. Scott's world was one of video games, low-level marijuana use, and a secret, burning devotion that would eventually consume them all. He didn't look at Kathleen as a stepmother. He watched the way she moved through the house, the way she manipulated his father, and the way she seemed to be the only source of light in his dim existence. His love wasn't a noble kind found in the novels he didn't read. It was a dark, obsessive hunger. It was a romance born of isolation and fueled by the toxic dynamics of a house, where the lines between family and stranger had blurred. On his phone, hidden behind passwords and layers of digital deception, Scott curated a world where he and Kathleen were the protagonists. He searched for things he couldn't say, allowed pornography that mirrored his own domestic situation, incestuous fantasies that bridged the gap between his reality and his desires. He believed, in the delusional heights of his obsession, that if the obstacle his father were removed, the $1 million insurance policy and the woman of his dreams would be his. Chapter 3. The $1 million motive. The air in the household grew thinner in June. Kathleen had begun her own research. While she played the role of the frustrated wife, her browser history told a different story. She was having an affair up. The detectives would later find the risque photos she sent to other men, the secret threads of a life Relis knew nothing about. She was a woman in the middle of a transition, waiting for the right moment to flip the script. Whether she and Scott ever spoke of it in the dark hallways is a mystery. Did they share a look over the dinner table? Did she know the depth of the Shazam transformation occurring within her stepson? Scott wasn't just playing video games anymore. He was visiting auction sites. He was searching for a specific tool, a Harrington and Richardson model, an antiquated revolver, a relic of a different era much like his father's values. He was searching for .22 caliber ammunition, reading about what such a small bullet could do to the human brain. The romance was now a conspiracy of intent. Chapter 4. The Final Walkthrough. June 25, 2016. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows over the streets of Antioch. Scott told his friends he was going to return the car to his dad. He said Relis was strict about him driving at night. It was a half-truth, the best kind of lie. He parked the car a block away, near a street called Big. He didn't walk toward his friend's house as he would later claim. He walked toward home. He walked toward the garage where he knew his father would be. The confrontation was likely brief. Relis, ever the disciplinarian, probably saw Scott and felt the usual flash of disappointment. He might have asked. Relis turned his back. It was a gesture of dismissal, a sign that he didn't view his son as a threat. He walked toward the threshold of the kitchen, toward the center of his kingdom. Scott followed. He didn't use a powerful weapon. He used the .22, the target practice gun he had researched for weeks. One shot. The sound was likely muffled by the walls of the house, a small pop that ended the life of a Kansas farm boy. Relis fell in the threshold, his life spilling onto the floor. He had worked so hard to keep under his feet. Brain matter and blood, the physical evidence of a shattered dream, splattered against the doorframe. Scott didn't stay. He ran. He ran back to the car, fumbled with the antiquated revolver, and in his haste, a spent casing fell into the spare tire. Well, a tiny, brass witness to his crime. Chapter 5. The Dance of the Detectives. Corporal James Coley and Detective Adrian Gonzalez were the men tasked with unweaving the web. When they first walked into the Eastman home, they didn't see a murder scene. They saw a medical call. He must have hit his head, the EMTs thought. But the bullet fragment found on Relis's back changed everything. Suddenly, the messy house wasn't just a sign of poor housekeeping. It was a crime scene. Coley was the veteran, the man who had seen 1,000 ways people hurt each other. Gonzalez was the cell phone guru, the man who understood that in the 21st century, our ghosts live in our pockets. Their investigation was a slow burn. They talked to Kathleen, who played the grieving, frustrated wife with practiced ease. She had an ironclad alibi. She was shopping with the kids. She was the picture of innocence, despite the $1 million motive lurking in the background. Then there was Scott, the scrawny kid who couldn't make eye contact. He told them about the condoms he bought, about the lost cell phone, about the ATM machine. Why would you randomly say you exited neither? Gonzalez wondered. It was the slip that broke the case. Chapter 6. The Mountain of Phones. The Echo ATM was a kiosk for selling old phones. To Scott, it was a graveyard where he could bury his secrets. To Gonzalez, it was a gold mine. The detective stood before the machine, the unmanned kiosk that had recorded Scott's face. As he sold the phone he claimed didn't exist. When the bin popped open, it was a literal mountain of cell phones. They dug, they searched, and then they found it. When Gonzalez plugged that phone into his forensic software, the romance Scott had built in his head was laid bare. The hundreds of searches for the H&R 9, the searches for the exact ammo used, and then the mom searches. The risque photos of Kathleen, the incestuous fantasies, the twisted devotion that had transformed a scrawny kid into a cold-blooded killer. Scott hadn't killed for money alone. He had killed for the queen of his dark castle. He believed that by removing the king, he could finally claim the throne. Chapter 7. The arrest was not a scene from an action movie. It was a quiet, devastating end. When Callie confronted Scott with the search history, the boy's voice turned meek. The body language that had been nervous became small. "I need a lawyer," Scott whispered. The game was over. Back at the house, the police arrived in full gear. Kathleen stood by as they handcuffed her stepson. "You know he's in love with you," Callie told her. The look on Kathleen's face was bizarre. It wasn't horror. It wasn't grief. It was a moment of realization, perhaps a flicker of pride, or perhaps the chilling understanding that her own manipulations had created a monster she could no longer control. Relis Eastman died in the IC, his family eventually pulling the plug to claim the $1 million he had worked his whole life to provide. Epilogue. The Echoes of Antioch. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. He traded the house on Bigelow for a cell in the California penal system. His romance ended not with a sunset, but with a steel door. Kathleen was never charged. There was no evidence she pulled the trigger, only that she had set the stage. She walked away with her share of the insurance money, a woman who had survived the storm she helped create. The daughters were left with the wreckage. No father to walk them down the aisle, no grandfather for the children. Just the memory of a man who came from the farms of Kansas to die on a kitchen floor in Antioch, betrayed by the very people he sought to protect. In the end, the story of the Eastmans wasn't a tragedy of crime. It was a tragedy of devotion, the kind that turns rotten when left in the dark. The kind that proves that sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who know exactly where to aim. Prologue. The heat of the valley. Antioch, California, was a city that breathed in the dust of the Delta and exhaled the weary sighs of 100,000 commuters. It was a place where the suburban dream often went to die under the blistering sun of the East Bay. To the outside world, the house on Bigelow Drive was just another beige box in a neighborhood of beige boxes. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of unwashed dishes, stale grievances, and a rot that had nothing to do with the food left on the counters. Relis Eastman was a man built of Kansas soil and military discipline. He was a pillar of granite in a house made of shifting sand. He believed in hard work, the American flag, and the sanctity of a home free from the poison of drugs. But Relis was a man blinded by his own integrity. He didn't see the shadows lengthening in the corners of his own living room. He didn't see that the woman he shared his life with was a stranger, or that the son he had raised was harboring a darkness that would eventually swallow them both. Chapter 1. The Siren of Bigelow Drive. Kathleen Ragnaby was a woman of many masks. To Relis, she was the wife he couldn't quite reach any more than mother of his younger children, a woman who had once brought color to his farm boy world. But to the rest of Antioch, and to the men she met in the dim light of digital screens, she was something else entirely. She moved through the cluttered house like a ghost, her eyes always fixed on her phone. The house was a disaster, laundry piled like mountain ranges in the hallways, dishes crusted with the remnants of last week's meals. Relis worked himself to the bone at the telecommunications company to provide for 5 children, but the more he brought home, the more Kathleen bled him dry. He stayed for the children. He stayed because he was a man who didn't know how to quit, even when the battle was already lost. Relis, the bills are due, she would say, her voice a flat, demanding monotone, never looking up from the risque photos she was sending to a lover across town. "I just gave you the paycheck, Kathleen," Relis would sigh, leaning against the kitchen threshold, the very spot where his life would eventually end. He was a good-hearted man, a man who believed that if he just worked a little harder, if he was just a little more protective, the family would hold together. He didn't know that the foundation was already gone. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Room. Scott Eastman was a shadow. At 21, he was scrawny, awkward, and spoke with a cadence that made people lean away, as if trying to decipher a code that didn't want to be cracked. He lived in the gaps of the household, moving between his father's rigid rules and his own hazy reality of marijuana smoke and video games. But Scott had a secret that burned hotter than the weed he smoked in the backyard. He didn't look at Kathleen as a stepmother. To him, she was the only light in a world that felt cold and judgmental. He watched her from the doorways. He watched the way she moved, the way she ignored his father, the way she seemed to be a prisoner in this house just like him. His obsession wasn't born of love. It was born of a warped, incestuous fantasy. In the dark of his room, his fingers flew across his phone screen, searching for things that would make a sane man recoil. He didn't want to be Kathleen's son. He wanted to be the man who rescued her. He wanted to be the man who replaced Reed. "Dad is too hard on you," Scott would whisper to her when Relis was at work. Kathleen would give him a half-smile, a manipulative glint in her eye. She knew Scott was her most loyal soldier. She used him to hide her tracks, to run her errands, to be the buffer between her and the man who paid the bills. She didn't realize she was playing with a fire that was preparing to consume the entire house. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Motivation. The turning point came in the form of a piece of paper, a life insurance policy. $1 million. To Kathleen, it was a ticket out of the clutter, out of Antioch, and away from the man she had grown to loathe. To Scott, it was the dowry for a future that only existed in his twisted mind. If Relis was gone, the money would be theirs, the house would be theirs, the world would finally be quiet. 3 weeks before the end, the digital trail began. Scott's phone became a log of a murder in progress. Harrington and Richardson pointed to revolver. Ballistics of a .22 long rifle bullet. How to kill someone instantly. He searched with the clinical detachment of a man planning a grocery list. He looked at gun auction sites, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen as he visualized the weight of the antique revolver in his hand. He wasn't a killer yet, but the transition was happening in the silence of his friend's house, between rounds of video games. Chapter 4. The Day the World Stopped. June 25, 2016. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the asphalt of Antioch. Kathleen had taken the younger children out. She was building her fortress on ironclad alibi of receipts, shopping bags, and public appearances. She was miles away, a perfect mother on a perfect Saturday. Relis was home. He was in the garage, perhaps tinkering with something, perhaps just enjoying a moment of silence in a house that was rarely quiet. Scott arrived. He parked his car a block away, tucked into the shadows of Bigelow Drive. He walked toward the house, the .22 revolver heavy in his pocket. This was the moment Shazam. The scrawny kid was stepping into the role of the executioner. Relis saw him. "Scott, are you high again? I told you, if I catch you with that stuff, you're out." Relis didn't see a threat. He saw a disappointment. He turned his back on his son, walking toward the kitchen door, toward the safety of his home. The threshold. Scott raised the revolver. It was an antiquated piece of machinery, a breaktop H&R 999. It felt like history in his hand. He pulled the trigger. The crack of the .22 was small, sharp, pathetic sound that didn't match the magnitude of the act. The bullet found its mark, entering the back of Relis's head. Relis collapsed. He didn't die instantly. He lay on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the mess of a life he had tried so hard to fix. Brain matter and blood pooled on the linoleum, mingling with the dust and the stale air. Scott didn't stay. He ran back to his car, fumbling with the revolver, breaking it open to eject the spent casing. In his haste, the small brass cylinder bounced into the spare tire well, a tiny golden seed of his own destruction. Chapter 5. The Mask of Grief. When Kathleen returned, the screaming began. Amia's voice pierced the neighborhood. "Mom, there's blood everywhere." Kathleen's performance was masterful. The 911 call was a symphony of hysteria. "Is he alive? I don't want to go in there. I'm scared." She stood outside with her children as the police arrived. She was the grieving wife, the shocked partner, but behind her eyes, the gears were turning. $1 million. It was almost within reach. Detective James Carley and Corporal Adrian Gonzalez didn't see a grieving family. They saw a puzzle that didn't fit. The house was a state of disarray, a contrast to the clean-cut military man lying in a pool of his own life force. This wasn't a robbery, Carley whispered, looking at the TV. A single bullet hole, straight in a .2, a target pistol, a small, intimate choice of weapon. The investigation began like a slow-motion car crash. They found the backpack in the yard. Scott's eyed marijuana. "I leave it outside so Dad doesn't get mad," Scott said, his voice a weird cadence, his eyes avoiding theirs. He looked like a cornered cat, but he was playing the part of the dim-witted son. Chapter 6. The Digital Ghost. The break came from an Echo ATM, a kiosk for selling old phones. Scott thought he was being clever. He sold his phone 5 hours before the murder. He thought that by getting rid of the device, he was getting rid of the evidence. He didn't realize the kiosk was a fortress of cameras. Detective Gonzalez, the cell phone guru, found the device. He plugged it in, and the ghost of Scott Eastman's mind poured out onto the screen. The searches for the H&R 9, the searches for the ammo, and then the mom searches. The detectives sat in silence as the hundreds of searches for incestuous pornography flashed before them. It wasn't just a murder for money. It was a murder for a twisted version of love. Scott believed that if Relis was dead, he and Kathleen could run off into the sunset. He had killed his father to win a woman who didn't even see him as a person. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The arrest wasn't a movie scene. It was a grim necessity. They went to the house in full gear. Kathleen opened the door an inch before the police surged in. "Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III. Scott stood up calmly. "I'm right here." As they led him away, Detective Callie looked at Kathleen. He told her the truth, that Scott had done it for her, that he was in love with her. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror. It was bizarre, a flicker of vanity, a moment of realization that her manipulation had worked too well. She was never charged. There was no proof she pulled the strings, only that she had created the environment where such a monster could grow. Epilogue. The Cost of Justice. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life. He vanished into the California penal system, a shadow finally reunited with the dark. The insurance money was split among the children minus the murderous one. Relis Eastman, the Kansas farm boy, was gone. His daughter would never have him to walk her down the aisle. His grandkids would never know the man who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over a family that didn't deserve him. In Antioch, the sun still beats down on Bigelow Drive. The houses still look the same from the outside, beige boxes under a blue sky. But the neighbors know. They know that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't the drugs on the street or the criminals in the night. Sometimes the monster is sitting at your kitchen table, eating your food, and waiting for the sun to go down. Justice was served, but it was a cold, hollow victory. Relis brought Scott into the world, and Scott took him out of it. And in the end, the only thing left was the silence of a house that was finally terribly quiet. The Silent Threshold. A novel based on a true tragedy. Chapter 1. The Kansas Farm Boy. Antioch, California, always felt like a place where the sun was trying to bleach the secrets out of the pavement. It was a sprawling community northeast of San Francisco, a city of 130,000 souls, caught between the industrial breath of the Delta and the quiet, dusty hills. To a man like Relis Carl Eastman III, it was a long way from the golden wheat fields of Kansas, but the dust was familiar. Relis was a man who belonged to the soil, even if he spent his days surrounded by the hum of telecommunications equipment and the tangled webs of fiber-optic cables. He was a Kansas farm boy at heart, stoic, broad-shouldered, and possessed of a work ethic that felt like a relic from a different century. He grew up under the vast, punishing skies of the Midwest, where the value of a man was measured by the calluses on his palms and the integrity of his word. He had joined the U.S. Army fresh out of high school, a boy looking for a way to serve a country he believed in with the same simplicity he believed in the harvest. The military had sharpened his discipline, but it had also instilled in him a rigid sense of order that would later become a source of both pride and friction in his domestic life. When he eventually settled in Antioch, taking a job with a major telecommunications firm, he brought that soldier's mindset with him. He was the provider, the protector, the silent engine that kept the family moving forward. By 2016, however, Relis was the anchor of a house that was slowly drifting out to sea. He was a man who scraped an honest living out of a world that felt increasingly dishonest. He had 5 children, 3 girls, with his current wife, Kathleen, a son named Scott from a previous marriage, and a young boy who was the light of his tired eyes. He worked overtime, took the extra shifts, and sacrificed his own comfort to ensure his children had a chance in an area where the streets were often a siren song for the wayward. But the house on the quiet street in Antioch was not the sanctuary Relis had envisioned. It was a facade of suburban bliss that masked a rotting interior. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stale food, unwashed laundry, and the silent, vibrating tension of a marriage that had died years ago. Kathleen Rognaby, Relis's wife, was a woman of sharp edges and restless desires. They were estranged, living under the same roof like 2 ghosts haunting different hallways. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations reduced to the cold logistics of child-rearing and the mounting pile of bills that Kathleen seemed to generate with reckless abandon. Relis worked until his hands were calloused and his eyes were rimmed with red. He was protective, perhaps to a fault. He hated the culture of the streets that bled into their neighborhood, the drugs, the easy violence, the waywardness of the youth. He especially hated marijuana, seeing it as the first step toward the abyss of wasted potential. He didn't know that the abyss wasn't just lurking at the edge of the neighborhood. It was already sitting at his kitchen table, watching him with hollow eyes. Chapter 2: The Shadow in the Hallway. Scott Eastman was 21, but he looked like he was made of spare parts and nervous energy. He was scrawny, short, and spoke with a cadence that made people lean in, trying to find the rhythm in his words. He was a young man who lived in the margins, rarely making eye contact. His presence in the house as unobtrusive as a shadow. To the world, he was just a quiet kid who liked video games. To Relis, he was a disappointment, a son who lacked the drive and the grit that had defined the Eastman men for generations. But Scott was watching. He was always watching. While Relis was at work, laboring to maintain the life they lived, Scott observed Kathleen. He saw the way she moved through the house with a practiced, feline grace. He saw the way she looked at her phone with a secret, triumphant smile, and the way she treated his father with a cold, calculated disdain that bordered on cruelty. To Scott, Kathleen wasn't just his stepmother. In the dark, claustrophobic theater of his mind, she was an idol, a victim, and a siren all at once. Scott's world was digital and hidden. He spent hours on the internet, retreating into the anonymity of the screen to escape the suffocating reality of his father's house. His online searches were a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a psychological labyrinth. He began to obsess over the idea of a life where Relis didn't exist, a life where he could be the one to protect Kathleen, where he could be the man she actually wanted, the one who didn't demand order or discipline. The tension in the house was a physical thing. Relis would come home, his boots heavy on the floor, and see the disarray, the dishes piled high, the clothes scattered like fallen leaves, the stale smell of neglect. The arguments would begin before he even took off his coat. "Is it too much to ask for a clean house?" Relis would bark, his voice a low thunder that rattled the windows. "I work 12 hours a day. Kathleen, the least you can do is keep this place from falling apart." "You're never here." "Relis," Kathleen would retort, her voice a jagged blade. "You want a maid? Hire one with the money you don't have. Don't come in here and lecture me about order when you're just a ghost who pays the mortgage." Scott would listen from his room, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He blamed his father for every tear Kathleen shed, for every moment of unhappiness in the house. He saw Relis as a tyrant, a barrier to the happiness he imagined he and Kathleen could share. He began to search, not for jobs, or for a way out of Antioch, but for tools. He searched for Harrington and Richardson .22. He searched for ballistics and penetration. He searched for life insurance payouts for accidental death. He was 21 years old, and he was planning a rebirth that would be baptized in blood. Chapter 3: The $1 Million Motivation. Kathleen Rognaby was a woman who knew the value of a dollar, especially a dollar she didn't have to sweat for. For 10 years, she had been a drain on Relis's resources, a parasite who thrived on his stability while despising his presence. She had affairs, numerous ones, and had even produced a child with another man. Yet she remained under Relis's roof. She let him pay the bills, let him provide the health insurance, and let him maintain the facade of a family for the sake of her own comfort. She was conniving, a master manipulator who painted Relis as the villain to anyone who would listen. To her friends and co-workers, she was the martyr, the victim of a lecherous, cheating husband who neglected her needs. In reality, it was Relis who was being walked over, a good-hearted man who couldn't bring himself to abandon the children, even if it meant living in a domestic purgatory. But Kathleen was looking for an exit strategy. A divorce was messy, expensive, and would likely leave her with far less than she felt she deserved. A death, however, was a clean break. Relis had a life insurance policy through his company, a value of $1 million. To a woman like Kathleen, that wasn't just a number on a page. It was freedom. It was a new life away from the unkempt house, and a husband whose very breathing seemed to irritate her. 3 weeks before the end, she began to research the specifics. She looked into the clauses, the double indemnity for accidents, and the timeline of a payout. She talked to co-workers about how manipulative Relis was, setting the stage for his eventual disappearance. She didn't know that Scott was watching her searches, too. He saw her interest in the money, and in his warped mind, he saw it as an invitation. If he removed the obstacle, Kathleen would be rich, she would be happy, and she would finally see him as her savior. They were moving in a silent, synchronized dance toward the same conclusion. A mother and a stepson bound by a dark, unspoken pact of convenience and obsession. Chapter 2. The Day the Sun Went Cold. June 25, 2016, started like any other Saturday in Antioch. The California heat was already rising by 10 in the morning, shimmering off the parked cars on the quiet street. Kathleen took the 2 youngest children out for a day of shopping, a routine escape from the stifling atmosphere of the house. Relis was home. He was always home on the weekends, usually trying to catch up on the repairs that never stayed fixed in a house that felt like it was crumbling from the inside out. He was in the garage, perhaps sorting through tools or planning a project that would never be finished. Scott was with his friends down the street, playing video games. It was his sanctuary, his alibi. But as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Scott felt the pull of the house. He told his friends he had to return the family car to his father. He promised he'd be back in 10 minutes to finish the level. He didn't go back. Scott parked the car a block away, avoiding the line of sight of the neighbor's security cameras. He pulled his hoodie up, despite the heat, and walked toward the house. In his pocket was an H&R Model 999 revolver, an antiquated piece of machinery, a top-rate 9-shot .22 caliber that he had acquired through Bacali channels. It felt heavy and cold against his leg. He entered through the garage. Relis was there, standing near the threshold that led into the kitchen. "What are you doing back so early?" Relis might have asked, his voice stern but not suspicious. Maybe he smelled the faint, skunky odor of marijuana on Scott's clothes there, one thing he had forbidden in his house. "I told you, Scott, if I catch you with that stuff again, you're out. I'm not supporting a drug habit under this roof." Relis, the soldier, the provider, turned his back to walk into the kitchen. He was probably thinking about the next bill, or the next argument with Kathleen. He didn't see his son raise the revolver. The .22 is a small bullet, often dismissed as a target practice round, but at close range, it is absolute. Scott pulled the trigger. The first shot missed, the small projectile punching a clean, straight hole through the television hanging on the living room wall, a silent witness to the betrayal. But the second shot found its mark. It struck Relis in the back of the head, at the base of the skull. The Kansas farm boy collapsed instantly, falling into the threshold between the garage and the kitchen he'd worked so hard to provide. There was no struggle. There was only the sudden, violent intrusion of lead into a brain that had spent 45 years trying to solve the problems of a family that didn't want him. Scott didn't stay to watch the life drain out of his father. He ran back to the car, fumbling with the revolver. As he tried to clear the spent casings, his hands shaking with a mixture of terror and triumph, one of the small brass shells fell into the spare tire well of the trunk. He drove back to his friends. He played video games. He even went to a store to buy a box of condoms he would never use, desperately trying to construct a timeline of a normal, horny. He thought he had committed the perfect crime for the woman he loved. Chapter 5. The Return. When Kathleen returned with the children hours later, the house was silent, but it was a heavy silence, a silence that felt like it was pressing against the walls. It was her daughter Amia who found him first. Her scream was a jagged tear in the suburban quiet, a sound that would haunt the neighborhood for years. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen ran in. She saw Relis on the floor. There was blood, so brain matter was splattered against the doorframe. She called 911, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a grieving widow. Is he alive? Am I? Is he alive? The responders arrived within minutes, the sirens wailing through the Antioch streets. Officer Ramirez was the first to cross the threshold. He saw the family outside, hysterical and refusing to enter. He walked into the kitchen and saw the victim. Mr. Eastman, Ramirez called out, though he knew there would be no answer. Relis was breathing, but it was the shallow, mechanical sound of a body that had already left the building. At first, the scene suggested an accident. Relis was a big man. The assumption was a medical emergency, a fall, a head cracked against the counter. But as the EMTs lifted him to transport him to the hospital, the truth fell out. A small, mangled piece of lead. Everyone, stop, Ramirez ordered, his hand moving to his holster. This is no accident. This is a crime scene. Chapter 6. The detectives. Corporal James Colley and Corporal Adrian Gonzalez were the hunters sent into the ruins of the Eastman family. Colley was the veteran, a man who had spent his career closing murder cases, his eyes hardened by years of seeing what people were capable of. Gonzalez was the younger detective, sharp, hungry, and possessed of a digital savvy that would prove to be Scott's undoing. They walked through the house, noting the jarring contrast. The outside was a nice bedroom community home. The inside was a wreck of neglect. Not your cleanest house, Colley remarked, stepping over a pile of dirty clothes. Stale food, dishes everywhere. Execution style, Gonzalez added, kneeling by the blood spatter, back of the head, someone he knew, someone he trusted enough to turn his back on. They started their search in the perimeter. In the backyard, they found the backpack. Inside was a wallet, marijuana, and the driver's license of Scott Eastman. The detectives exchanged a look. The son's backpack was in the yard, but the son was supposedly miles away. The investigation turned toward the family. They went to the hospital, where Relis lay in the intensive care unit, his life measured in the rhythmic beep of monitors and the hiss of a breathing tube. He was brain dead, a tragedy in a hospital gown. Colley interviewed Kathleen first. She was quick to point the finger at Relis's infant. She painted him as a man with women on the side, a lech who had invited his own destruction. But Colley noticed the way her eyes lingered on the paperwork. He noticed her intense interest in the insurance payout. Then, there was Scott. Scott came off as unassuming. Colley would later recall. Scrawny, weird cadence, no eye contact. He didn't seem to have the stomach for a hunt, let alone a kill. Scott told him he was at a friend's. He told them he had a strained relationship with his dad because of the strict rules. He admitted to leaving his backpack outside to hide his weed. He seemed like a low-level loser, but he was lying about his phone. He was lying about his movements, and he was lying about how much he loved his stepmother. Chapter 7. The Echo in the Machine. The break in the case didn't come from a dramatic confession or a smoking gun. It came from an Echo ATM, a cold, unmanned kiosk in a shopping mall where people sell old cell phones for quick cash. Scott had told the detectives he didn't have a phone. He said he'd lost it weeks ago. But Gonzalez, the cell phone guru, knew the digital habits of the desperate. He tracked the transactions at the local Echo kiosk. He found the footage. And there was Scott Eastman, 5 hours after his father was shot, standing at the kiosk. He was selling a phone. He used the very ID he claimed he didn't have. He looked into the hidden camera of the machine with the eyes of a man who thought he had finally won. The detectives recovered the phone from the bin of the machine. It was a digital diary of a descent into madness. There were hundreds of searches for the exact weapon, the H-22. There were searches for ammunition prices and how to shoot someone in the head. And then, there were the mom searches. Scott's phone was a testament to a twisted, Shakespearean obsession. He had thousands of searches for incestuous pornography involving. He had saved risque photos that Kathleen had sent to other men, viewing them in the dark of his room as he plotted his father's demise. The motive was clear. It wasn't just the $1 million. It was the woman. Scott believed that with Relis gone, he could provide for Kathleen. He could be the man in the house. He could fulfill the dark fantasy that had consumed his young mind. Chapter 8. The Final Threshold. The arrest was a silent, tactical affair. Colley and Gonzalez didn't want to stand off. They went to the house in full gear, the morning light reflecting off their badges. When Kathleen opened the door, the officers moved in like a tide. Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III. Scott stood up from the couch. He didn't fight. He didn't cry. He looked at Kathleen, perhaps waiting for the sunset he had promised himself. As they led him away in handcuffs, Collie pulled Kathleen aside. He told her the truth that her son was in love with her, that he'd murdered his father, thinking they were going to be together. The look on Kathleen's face wasn't horror. It wasn't the look of a mother whose son had just destroyed their lives. It was a look of bizarre vanity. She looked almost flattered, as if the blood on her kitchen floor was a tribute to her own beauty. In the end, the jury saw through Scott's meek act. The ballistics from the television and the bullet found in the garage matched the H-999. The casing in the trunk was the final nail. Scott Eastman was sentenced to 55 years to life in the California penal system. Kathleen was never charged. There was no physical evidence she had handled the gun, and no recording of her asking for the hit. She stayed in the house for a while. The $1 million eventually split among the other children minus the one who had pulled the trigger. Relis Eastman, the Kansas farm boy, was buried far from the dust of Antioch. He was a man who worked himself to the bone for a family that viewed him as an obstacle. The house on the quiet street remains, a shell of a suburban dream. And in a prison cell, Scott Eastman waits for a letter from a stepmother, who has already forgotten his name. His mind still trapped in the shadow of the hallway where he chose a fantasy over his own father's life. Epilogue. Antioch is still a town of 130,000 people. The sun still bleaches. The secret's out of the pavement. The Delta breeze still carries a scent of salt and regret. And the $1 million didn't buy anyone happiness, it only bought a deeper kind of silence. The Glass House of Antioch, Part 2. The Descent into Truth. Chapter 8. The ICU Vigil. The intensive care unit at Sutter Delta Medical Center didn't smell like a home. It smelled like bleach and impending silence. Relis Eastman lay at the center of a web of plastic tubing and humming monitors, a stark contrast to the man who had once hauled hay on a Kansas farm. His chest rose and fell, not by his own will, but by the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator. Kathleen sat by the bed, her face a mask of weary devotion. To the nurses, she was the tragic wife. To herself, she was a woman waiting for a clock to strike midnight. Every beep of the heart monitor was a second closer to $1 million resolution. She held his hand to hand that had worked 40 years to give her a life. She'd spent 10 years betraying and felt nothing but the coldness of a stranger. Scott stood in the corner, his scrawny frame almost vanishing into the shadows of the hospital room. He watched his stepmother with an intensity that bordered on the religious. In his mind, he hadn't killed her father. He had removed an obstacle. He watched the way her hair caught the sterile fluorescent light, imagining the day the machines would stop and their real life would begin. "He's not coming back, Scott," Kathleen whispered, her voice cracking just enough to be convincing. "I know," Scott replied. His voice was flat, devoid of the grief a son should feel. "But you'll be okay now. I'll make sure you're okay." Chapter 9. The Guru and the Ghost. Back at the Antioch Police Department, Detective Adrian Gonzalez was descending into a different kind of darkness. He was the cell phone guru, a man who understood that a person's digital history was more honest than their heartbeat. The Echo RTM had yielded the prize. Scott's discarded phone. As Gonzalez bypassed the security layers, the data began to pour out like a ruptured vein. It wasn't just evidence. It was a map of a fractured mind. "Callie, you need to see this," Gonzalez said, his voice tight. Detective James Callie leaned over his shoulder. The screen was filled with search results. Harrington and Richardson Model 999.22 caliber trajectory. How to clean a revolver. He didn't just stumble into this, Callie noted, his jaw tightening. This was a hunt. He researched the gun, the ammo, the kill shot. He was looking for the H&R 999 specifically. It's an antique hard to trace, but distinct. Then, Gonzalez typed the keyword that changed everything. The results were a deluge of filth and obsession. Thousands of searches for incestuous pornography, specifically focusing on There were photos Scott had taken of Kathleen when she wasn't looking her sleeping, her hanging laundry, her back turned to him. It was a digital shrine to a woman who was technically his mother, but in his mind, his ultimate prize. "He didn't kill Relis for the money," Gonzalez whispered. "He killed him to clear the bed." Chapter 10. The Interrogation Room Dance. The air in the interrogation room was stagnant. Scott sat across from Callie, looking smaller than ever. He spoke in that strange, rhythmic cadence, trying to maintain the image of the simple weed-smoking gamer. "Scott, let's talk about the car," Callie started, his tone deceptively conversational. "You said you parked a block away to avoid your dad. right? Because he was strict about you driving at night. Yeah, Scott muttered, picking at a fingernail. He gets real mad. I just wanted to see my friends. But the neighbor's camera shows you walking back toward the house at 8:53 p.m., and you were gone for 45 minutes. That's a long time to just drop off a car. Scott's eyes flickered. The cornered cat look returned. I went to the store to buy condoms. Big box of condoms. Callie leaned in, his shadow looming over the boy. With what money? Scott, your wallet was in the backyard. We found it in your backpack. How do you buy a big box of condoms with no money? The silence stretched. Scott's breathing became shallow. He was digging his own grave with every stuttered lie. And the Echo ATM, Gonzalez added, stepping into the room. The one where you sold the phone you said you lost. We have you on video. Scott, using your ID, selling the phone that contains every gun search and every twisted thought you've had about your stepmother for the last 6 months. Scott's voice became a meek, tiny whistle. That wasn't my phone. It is your phone, Scott, and it's going to be your ticket to a very small cell. Chapter 11. The decision to pull the plug had been made. Relis was gone, his life insurance policy now a looming reality. But before the first cent could be paid, the law arrived. Callie didn't want a quiet arrest. He knew the volatile nature of the household. When the team hit the door on Bigelow Drive, the beige box finally cracked open. Police, get down. The younger children screamed, Kathleen frozen in the living room, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and calculated indignation. Scott stood up from the sofa, his expression almost serene. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He let them cinch the zip tees around his wrists, as if it were a coronation. Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III. As they led him out, Callie stopped in front of Kathleen. He saw the flicker of the siren behind her eyes. He did it for you, Kathy and Callie said, his voice dripping with disgust. He thought you two were going to ride off into the sunset on Relis's blood money. He's in love with you. The reaction was the most chilling part of the night. Kathleen didn't weep. She didn't faint. She simply tilted her head, a small, vain smile ghosting her lips. Did he really say that? She asked, as if she'd just received a compliment at a dinner party. Chapter 12. The Echo of the Gavel. The trial was a clinical dissection of a family's rot. The jury watched the Echo ATM footage. They saw the ballistics reports linking the .2 to slug in Relis's brain to the H&R 999 revolver Scott had researched. They heard the testimony of the daughters, whose lives had been shattered by a brother's depravity. But the most damning evidence was the silence of Scott Eastman. He sat at the defense table, never looking at his sisters, never looking at the image of the father he had executed. When the verdict came guilty of first-degree murder, there was no outcry, only the heavy, leaden weight of justice. 55 years to life. In the aftermath, the insurance money was distributed. Kathleen took her share, retreating into the shadows of a different life, never charged but forever stained by the environment she had cultivated. The house on Bigelow Drive was sold, the laundry and the stale food cleared away, but the ghost of Relis Eastman remained in the soil of Antioch. He was a man who worked until his hands bled to protect a home that was actually a glass house, shattered from the inside by a son who saw love as a target and a father as an obstacle. Epilogue. The Long Shadow. Years later, the daughters of Relis Eastman still look at the sky and wonder about the farm boy from Kansas. They have the weddings he'll never attend, and the children he'll never hold. Scott sits in a cell, the romantic fantasy of his stepmother now a cold, gray memory. He is a man who traded a father's life for a digital ghost, realizing too late that in the real world, when you pull the trigger, the only thing that waits for you on the other side is the dark. Justice was done, but the glass could never be mended. Relis brought a son into the light, and that son dragged him into the abyss. In the end, Antioch is just another city, and the house on Bigelow is just another box, keeping its secrets behind beige walls and a silent kitchen door. The Fragile Threshold. A Novel of Antioch. Chapter 1. The Scorch of Antioch. The sun in Antioch, California, does not merely shine. By mid-afternoon, the heat becomes a physical presence, a dry, relentless weight that bakes the suburban streets until the asphalt ripples like a mirage. It is a town of 130,000 souls, nestled northeast of San Francisco, caught between the industrial breath of the Bay and the roll-in, golden hills that turn to tinder in the summer. To the locals, the heat is a familiar enemy, one that forces them into the dim, air-conditioned shadows of their homes. On Bigelow Drive, the houses are arranged in a tidy, deceptive symmetry. Lawns are kept mostly green through a stubborn war with the drought, and the silence is usually broken only by the hum of air conditioners or the distant bark of a dog. But the Eastman house, beige, unremarkable, a sanctuary of middle-class normalcy, held a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a held breath, of words swallowed and secrets buried under the floorboards. Inside, the air was stagnant, untouched by the breeze that occasionally rattled the dry leaves of the oak trees outside. It carried the faint, sickly scent of unwashed dishes, stale food, and the heavy static electricity of a marriage that had died years ago, but refused to be buried. The domestic rot was visible in the corners piles of laundry that had become part of the furniture, layers of dust on family portraits that no one looked at anymore. Relis Eastman was a man built from the red dirt and hard winters of Kansas, a former army man who had traded his uniform for the climbing belt of a telecommunications worker. He carried the prairie in his gaiter, steady, unyielding rhythm. He was a man of wires, signals, and binary certainties. He spent his days ensuring the world could talk to itself, while he returned home to a house where the lines of communication had been cut long ago. He lived in a DMZ, sleeping in a separate room from his wife Kathleen, navigating the hallways of his own home like a weary soldier in occupied territory. He was a provider, a workaholic, as his daughters called him, trying to scrape out an honest living in a neighborhood that felt increasingly hostile. Kathleen Rognaby moved through the house like a ghost who still held the keys to the treasury. She possessed a sharp-edged beauty, a face honed by years of resentment and secret calculations. She was younger than Relis, a woman who felt trapped by the very security he provided. To the outside world, she was a mother of 5, a woman holding a complex family together. To Relis, she was the architect of his financial ruin and the stranger who shared his roof. For 10 years, she had been bleeding him dry, as the detectives would later discover, engaging in affairs and even bearing a child by another man while Relis paid the bills. And then there was Scott. At 21, Scott Eastman was a shadow in the corner of the room. Scrawny, pale, and possessed of eyes that seemed to perceive a frequency of reality no one else could hear. He was the relic of Relis's first marriage. He was a Kansas boy who had lost his way in the California haze. To his father, Scott was a disappointment wrapped in a haze of marijuana, smoker boy who lacked the grit to make something of himself. But to Scott, his father wasn't a hero. He was the Great Wall of Antioch, a cold, judgmental barrier standing between Scott and the only warmth he had ever known. That warmth was his stepmother, Kathleen. To Scott, she wasn't the woman cheating on his father. She was a goddess in a house of dust, the only person who looked at him without disappointment. And in the dark, quiet hours of the night, that affection had curdled into something far more dangerous. Chapter 2: The Shopping Trip and the Scream. June 25th began with the kind of heat that made the air feel like a solid object. Kathleen had been out all day with the 2 younger children, seeking refuge in the air-conditioned temples of the local shopping mall. It was a tactical retreat from the tension at home, a day of distractions and consumer comfort. When they pulled back into the driveway in the late afternoon, the house looked peaceful. The garage door was closed, the curtains drawn. But as the car door opened and the children spilled out, the peace was shattered with a violence that no one saw coming. Amia, Kathleen's daughter, was the first to enter. She was a girl of bright laughter, but the sound that came out of her throat as she stepped into the kitchen was a high-pitched tearing of the air. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. "Mom, what is going on?" Kathleen ran inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her young son stood near the doorway, his face a mask of primal confusion. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at the floor. "There's blood everywhere." Kathleen pushed past them. The sight hit her like a physical blow. Relis was on the floor, sprawled in the threshold between the garage and the kitchen. He was face down, his large frame looking unnervingly small in the pool of dark, viscous liquid spreading across the linoleum. It was thick, coagulated, reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. She didn't go to him. She didn't check for a pulse. In that moment of crisis, her instinct was one of distance. She turned and ran back outside, fumbling for her phone, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she dialed 911. 911. "What is your emergency?" My husband. There's blood. Is he alive? I don't know. Her voice was hysterical, a whirlwind of panic that filled the dispatcher's headset. Ma'am, can you go in and help him? Can you perform CPR? No, Kathleen sobbed, backing away from the house as if it were a predator. I don't want to